And Mohammed, this is a big question. As we know, there are some sort of restrictions that are coming down quickly in some of these European countries again, and some pushback, not only in Europe, but also here in the United States. What's going to happen? There is not the will for people to live with the same sort of lockdowns that we saw back in the spring that led to such steep economic declines.
So, Becky, I was with you last week and I suggested keep an eye on Europe. And we've learned a lot in a week's time. We've learned, one, that these cases are translating to higher hospitalization. B, that the test and trace system gets overwhelmed. C, that governments end up by reacting. And D, and perhaps the most sobering, is that these very elegant, on paper, focused approach, where you just focus on the areas where it's worse, end up being very difficult to do it in practice. So governments in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Belgium, and the list goes on, end up doing things that look more like lockdown light than something that we were hoping would be much more qualified. So it will have an impact, and Europe is looking at a 50% probability of a double-dip recession.
So what happens next? I mean, Mohammed, there's a big question about whether these lockdowns will even work. You're not talking about shutting down things entirely, just saying the bars have to close after 6 p.m. I mean, you can't catch COVID before 6 p.m.?
And that's the problem, is that we haven't yet found this balance between three things: public health, normal economic functioning, and personal freedoms. And, you know, if you're China and you can take the third thing away and just deal with two, you can solve it. So we haven't yet found it. So we're going to continue to iterate like this, which means that the recovery is not going to be smooth. It's going to have lots of bumps. And there is a material risk in some countries of going back into recession, which, you know, last summer we thought, that's it. We've gotten out of recession. We won't go back down again.
So how does this play out? And by the way, take how this plays out and then try and translate to how the markets are going to interpret all of this. You know, it's like the 8th iteration of what this all means. It's certainly not the most important thing, the market's reaction to this, but it is what we're kind of paying attention to.
It is. And so far, markets have been completely insulated because of monetary policy. And there was a hope in the marketplace that fiscal would come in and then would flood the system with both monetary and fiscal, and we simply would overwhelm these negative fundamentals. Now we've learned a few things, that on the fiscal side, it's harder, it's politically harder. And you know what, even if we get it, it doesn't go to financial assets like monetary policy does. It goes into income support, which is good for people, but less good for markets directly. I mean, I think the bottom line is it all comes down once again to the liquidity conditioning. Will markets believe that central banks can simply decouple valuations from fundamentals for another round? It's all about conditioning. It's all about behavioral finance right now, Becky.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.